Welcome to today's 5-minute Bible study in the book of Hebrews. We're in chapter 4, and today we're looking at Hebrews chapter 4, verses 4 through 11. Now remember, as we began this chapter in yesterday's session, we saw that the author of Hebrews is warning the Israelites about entering the rest of God. He had talked in chapter 3 about how the Israelites, even though they were delivered from slavery in Egypt, because of their disobedience, because of their unbelief, they did not enter the promised land. The original generation did not enter the promised land. And the author of Hebrews calls that the rest. God had a rest for them, and they refused to enter. And so he warned Christian believers, don't be the same. God has a promised land for you. It is the life of abundance and victory in Jesus Christ. That is his rest for you. Don't be like those Israelites of old and refuse to enter. Now he's continuing that thought in verses 4 following, but now he is beginning to call it the Sabbath rest. He calls this rest of God that he has for all his followers the Sabbath rest. Notice how he describes it, beginning at verse 4. For somewhere he is speaking about the seventh day in these words. On the seventh day God rested from all his works. And again in the passage above he says, they shall never enter my rest. Therefore, since it still remains for some to enter that rest, and since those who formerly had the good news proclaimed to them did not go in because of their disobedience, God again set a certain day. He called it today. This he did when a long time later he spoke through David, as in the passage already quoted, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. For if Joshua had given them rest, God would not have spoken later about another day. There remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest also rests from their works, just as God did from his. Let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest, so that no one will perish by following their example of disobedience. So now he's telling us this rest that God has for us is a Sabbath rest. The Israelites did not enter, that original generation, but we should. There still remains for the people of God a Sabbath rest. Why does he call it a Sabbath rest? Well, this takes us back to the days of creation. We read chapters 1 and 2 of Genesis. You remember God in 6 days created all the world, all that is in it. And on the seventh day, which is the Sabbath day, God rested from all his works. And he made the day holy. So the Sabbath day is sacred. It is set aside. Now, what does the Sabbath rest mean? You know, when you read the creation story, it says God rested from his works. Well, we certainly understand that God was not tired. It's not like he was exhausted from the work of creation and needed a day off. No. Rest means more than the fact that God had to rest. We know he did not. Rest is a way of describing wholeness and perfection. God had created the world for our habitation, for his creation to live in. And when it says he rested, that means he had finished the work. He had provided the abundant place for his creation to live in, and they could live in that rest. So when God declared the Sabbath day holy, he was saying, the work is complete. It is as it should be. It is meant to be whole. So the Sabbath rest is in many ways a prophetic word to us of the wholeness of life God has for us. So when we are to enter the Sabbath rest, that does not mean that after you're saved, you never have anything to do. You take every day off. No. It means that after you're saved, you enter the Sabbath rest. That is the life of wholeness, the life of abundance, life as it is intended to be. In the original creation story, when it says God rested, as his way of telling us, I've made the world as it should be. Your place of living, of habitation, it is perfect for you. Live in it wholly and fully. Now, of course, sin would interrupt that, but that was the way, that was not intended. That was our rebellion. But in the world's creation, the Sabbath rest was the way of saying the world is a place of abundance for you. And now once we experience the deliverance from sin, that's our salvation, we're set free from the curse of sin, we can enter into the wholeness of life that God has for us. So when he says, enter the Sabbath rest, he's saying as the saved people of God, live fully in the whole life that God has provided for you. You've been set free from sin. Now you can live life wholly and fully and completely as God intended. That is the Sabbath rest. That's the promised land for the Christian. I refer you again to that verse in the Gospel of John where Jesus says, I've come to give you life and to give it in abundance. The Sabbath rest is that life of abundance, that life of victory, that life of wholeness. Now the Israelites, the original generation, though they had experienced deliverance, refused to enter the promised land of abundance, the land of milk and honey. And so the author of Hebrews says, you Christians, don't do the same. Don't be those who refuse to enter the whole life, the life of victory, the full life of salvation that God has for you. Be sure to enter the Sabbath rest. What a wonderful word for us. Enter that rest of God, that whole life God has saved you for. Hope you join us tomorrow. We'll continue talking about these things in our 5-minute Bible study in the book of Hebrews.